introduction to variables, the basic thing which we have to understand is when we are going to study something, when we are going to understand some phenomenon, the basic thing which we would be identifying as the first stage of our research would be identification of variables for our study. Now, these variables, when we are talking about the concept, the so-called concept called variable, maybe that can be qualitative as well as quantitative. But when we are talking about a variable, definitely, if it is part of our research study, it should be possible for measurement. Okay, it should be possible for measurement. That's why I put it like this: can take any quantitative value. Quantitative value means it itself can carry a value, or we should be in a position to assign a value for that variable. That is, we have to number it, we have to identify it, and we have to say that yes, if it is present or absent, yes, this is the value, or it has to say take some value when we are talking about a variable. If that is not possible, if you cannot identify it, if you cannot quantify it, it's better that we don't go for studying that variable. And another thing, you will get to know more when we are going to discuss about types of variable. Another thing which you have to know is the value of a variable can change over time. It can also change no, as we proceed with more variable, more data. Right. Say, for example, when we are talking about the height of people in a campus. Okay, the value, the average value of that variable can change depending upon the sample we have taken. So maybe at some point of time, the average can be 5.5 inches, right? Or it can go up to maybe 10 inch, depending upon what we are going to discuss. So now when we are talking about another example is the mark in a class. So maybe for the first year university exam, the average mark in our class can be 80%. So we are looking at the variable called marks scored by students for a particular subject, maybe for our subject. So if that average for our subject is 80, in the coming year, it can vary depending on the circumstances, depending on the quality of students, depending on the quality of teacher, all that, it can vary. So mark as such, the average mark scored by first PG students is the variable. It can take different value as in different conditions. So that's why we say that the values can differ at varying times. And as I said, it should be a measurable concept. I should be able to quantify that, pin down that to a real value, or maybe assigned value. I have put few examples, like I am looking at the financial awareness of people in Kalamasheri Panchayat. So I have to have some quantity value for financial awareness. Then if I'm looking at financial performance, that's another variable. Customer satisfaction, another variable which I can study for. No, I just picked it from different types of studies. Stress is another variable which I can measure when I'm talking about the psychological impact of a particular on a particular employee. Stress in while performing the work in a banking environment, or maybe stress occur to an employee when he is having his profession as IT in IT sector. So that is, I should be able to measure that concept called stress. If I'm not able to bring some value to that, I will not be able to arrive at some meaningful conclusion. That's why always we say that it can take a real value, like height, it has its own value. But when I'm talking about stress, I'm going to measure that with some kind of factors, right? So that also would be assigned with a value, what is the level of stress. So that's why we say that a variable should have some kind of value being assigned to it, whether that be a quantitative or a qualitative. But then you can argue that what about qualitative study, where I'm looking at the like a case study. What is the kind of impact, psychological impact on people because of this current pandemic, psychological impact, or what is the impact of the mood, the employees' variations in mood when depend into his output, his job output. What is the impact of mood variations? What is the impact of family conditions on an employee performance? So there are many concepts which you might find it very difficult to bring that into quantitative terms. But from a social science research angle, it is being said that here in this context, a variable should have some kind of value, real value, or a value assigned to it to reach to a conclusion, to do statistical analysis, to go with the interpretation, right? So that is what no, we talk about a variable, and it can, the type of variable can depend on the purpose we are into, right? So that's about variables. Now we are going to discuss, it's a lengthy type. Okay, you have 10 types of variable broadly, but if you're trying to expand that, you have more than that, but at least 10 types, which we should be very thorough with the types of variables. So as I said, the variable is something which can take a value. Okay, it can have a real value, as I said in the case of marks, or it can have an assigned value, as I was discussing about stress or employee feeling or family circumstances, all that. Now, type of variables, what we will be discussing is 10 types. Basically, we start with the first one is dependent variable. Some part of it we have already discussed: dependent variable, independent variable, discrete variable, continuous variable, extraneous variable, intervening variables, dichotomous variable, quantitative and qualitative variable, moderating variable, confounding variables. So these are the types of variables which we will be discussing in our today's class. Okay, let's go with the first explanation of dependent variable. Now, as the name indicates, dependent variable, no, the performance or the output or the value of this variable depends on some other variables. The impact of some variable is felt on this particular variable, and we are going to study that. So such type of variables will be called as dependent. It is dependent on something other than that. Its value is dependent on some other variable. So that's why we also call this as responsive variable or consequent variable, consequent of something, responding to some other scenario. So that's why we call this as dependent variable. Say I have put one example, which in all these cases, I'll be just quoting this particular example itself for you to understand that in a better way. So I've just used one example: impact of after sales service on customer satisfaction. So definitely the dependent variable would be customer satisfaction. What is the impact of after sales service on the satisfaction level of customers? So we are saying the satisfaction of customers is dependent on many factors. Maybe for this particular study, we are looking into after sales service. So that is dependent variable. The name itself, its performance is dependent on some factor or maybe many factors. Okay, that's the case of dependent variable. Now look at, I'm going to explain the next category, next type, that is independent variable, with the same example. So without turning the page itself, you can say that, okay, in this case, the independent variable will be impact of the after sales service. Right, so after sales service will be something called as independent variable in this particular study, and we are looking at what is the impact of this independent variable on dependent variable called customer satisfaction. Now we can say that what is independent variable? A variable that can be manipulated to study its effect on another. we are looking at what is the impact of after sales service on customer satisfaction. Maybe we are looking at what is the impact of price on demand. It's very easy for you to understand price on demand. What is the impact of advertising on demand for a product? So here, and one thing which you have to remember is, depending on the nature of the study, the position of independent variable and dependent variable can vary, can change. Okay, demand, the price on demand. Okay, what is the impact of price on demand? So here the independent variable is price and dependent variable is demand for a product. Okay, but I can also look into a scenario where now what is the impact of demand on the company performance, on the financial performance of the company. So in this case, demand for the product became an independent variable and the financial performance of the company became a dependent variable. So looking into the condition, the position of the variable can vary. Okay, that is particularly related to how are we going to study the relationship between the variables, that we have to understand. So independent variable is a variable which is supposed to have some kind of impact on some other variable. That is why it is also called as predictor variable or stimulus variable or antecedent. When we are going with extensive regression models, we talk about antecedents. So in that case, that is just referral to independent variables that is going to affect the scenario under our study. So antecedent is also another name for independent variable. So in the same example which I was saying here, after sales service will be an independent variable and the dependent variable, as I said, would be customer satisfaction. So we learned the concept of variables in two ways, two types. One is independent variable, another one is dependent variable. Okay. Now we are going to next is discrete variables. That is the keyword which you have to remember is it's a variable that can take only integer values. It cannot have continuous values. Say, for example, when we are talking about number of students in a class, I cannot say 1.5. I cannot say 1.5. I cannot say 1.85. Either I will have to say 1 or 2. There is nothing called as in between. So such variables are we call as discrete variables, a variable that can be expressed only in integer values. Okay, the opposite of this is continuous variable. Say when I'm talking about about the height or weight, I can when I'm talking about my weight, I can say it is 55.5. It's possible. 55.5. It's possible. But when I'm talking about the number of students in a class, I can never say that as 55.5. I have to either say as 55 or it can be 65. It cannot take any value between that. So such variables are what we call as discrete variables. Discrete variables. The opposite of that is continuous variable, where I said the example as it can take any value in between, like height of a person, mark of a student, or maybe weight of a person. All that will be brought under the category of continuous variable. That's what we're going to discuss in the next slide. That is continuous variable, a variable that can assume any value even in decimal points. So again, we learn discrete variables and continuous variable. By the time we finish this, you also should learn that. That's why I'm again and again, I'm just repeating the same thing. So first we talked about discrete variables where it cannot take any value in between. It can be expressed only in integers, only as integers. Okay, whole numbers. And the example which I said is you can express the number. Number is very particular about that, number of people or the count in a class, or you're looking at the number of people who are using online services in a bank. You cannot say 10.5 people are using. Either you have to say 10 people or 11 people, right? So that is what we call as a as we say, integer value or whole value. The opposite of that is what? Continuous variable. Continuous variable is a variable that can take any value, maybe in decimal points. We said the example of height only. So now, by now, we discussed 4 types of variables. First one we discussed was dependent variable. The value is dependent on some other factor. Then we talked about independent variable. Independent variable are supposed to have an impact on some variables. They are also called as predictor variables. They are actually causing an impact on some other variable. So such type of variables are called as independent variables. And then we discussed about discrete and continuous. Discrete can take only integer values, and continuous variable that can take any value even in decimal. The next thing what we are going to discuss is little different from what we are discussing now. Extraneous variable, we had a little discussion about that when we were discussing about the formal designs and all. Extraneous variables, as I say, they have some kind of impact on the dependent variables. We know it, they have an impact on the dependent variable, but we are not making that part of our study because maybe that is not, no, currently that is not within the scope of our study. So we are just avoiding that. Okay, we are avoiding the impact of extraneous variable, but we know that they can have some kind of impact on our study, and we will try to nullify as far as possible the impact of these extraneous variables on the results of our study. Right. So in the same example which we were quoting, that is impact of after sales service on customer satisfaction, there is definite that even though you have 100% or well or excellent after sales service, customer satisfaction is also dependent on quality of the product. We know that if you're trying to do better service, do excellent service, maybe the customer will be happy. But we cannot say that it will always guarantee the 100% customer satisfaction, because there are many other factors. In that, one prominent factor is quality of the product. So that is an extraneous variable. But for the present study, we are not including that within the scope of our study. But we know that quality of the product is one factor that can affect the result of our study. So we will have to devise some methodology, some methods where we are nullifying or eliminating the impact of this extraneous variable for quality of the product. We are trying to nullify that. Otherwise, the results of a study will be little deviated from the actual scenario. Right. So that is why extraneous variables are those variables which are supposed to affect the dependent variable, but presently they are beyond the scope of the study. Okay, such variables are called as extraneous variables. That's why I put it a variable not related to the purpose of a study, but affects a dependent variable. See, for example, the present one, it is not related to the purpose of the study. We are looking at what is the impact of after sales service on customer satisfaction. But we know that quality of product is one factor that can have a definite impact on customer satisfaction. Such type of variables are what we call as extraneous variable. Now, you might be wanting to ask me, then why can't we include? See, when we look into a social science research, we can identify a number of extraneous variables and its impact can vary. But because of our limitations in time or our resources, a researcher would be confined, or he would be forced to confine to certain variables for that particular study. Maybe when he's concluding his study, the researcher can mention that future studies can include these factors also into the study. That can be quoted as scope for future research to verify or to ensure that the results of the study are parallel or maybe are reflecting the real condition. So he or she can say that yes, these variables can be included in future studies, so that the results may be little more reflective of the actual condition. Okay, so such variables which are having some kind of impact, but which are not part of the study, will be brought as extraneous variables. Now going with the next is intervening variables. Um, Now things are getting little. There is difference, but if you don't listen to me, you will feel confused. So listen to me very carefully. Intervening variables, okay, as the name indicates, a variable occurring between independent and dependent variables. This is a variable that is occurring between independent and dependent variables, and they are also called as mediating variables or interfering variables. Okay, intervening variables or mediating variables or interfering variables. If you're going for an extensive study, if you're going for maybe for the award of your thesis, PhD thesis, you will be considering the effect of this mediating variables also for your study to ensure that the results are near to the actual condition. These are in between. This is maybe we can call that as second independent variable. Okay, this is between the independent and the dependent variables, and it is having an impact on them, on the dependent and independent variable. So, for example, they can have some kind of impact on the relationship between the. Maybe that is right. It can have some kind of impact on the relationship between dependent and independent variable. That's what we call as the mediate. That's why we are saying it's mediating the relationship between independent and dependent variable. Say I have quoted example as, say, in our study on impact of after sales service on customer satisfaction, the distribution channel can mediate their relationship. Maybe if the distribution channel, in the sense, if it is online, it can have different impact. If it is through a wholesaler, if it is through a retailer, if it is through direct sales, can have difference, right? So I've just put that example. There are many other mediating variables that can affect the relationship between after sales service and customer satisfaction. So this mediating or intervening variable are said to affect the relationship between the independent variable and the dependent variable. It's traveling in between. So if I establish two models, if I establish a relationship between the independent to dependent, it will cut the line between that relationship. It will intervene. Now, how that is, the mediations, as you proceed in research, you will understand there can be full mediation, there can be partial mediation. It might be affecting little. In that case, we say that it's partial. If it is affecting to, when we look at the value, if it is affecting to a greater extent, we will say that these are called as a full mediation. But don't confuse yourself. Only the first fact which you have to understand is it will be cutting, it will be intervening the relationship between the dependent and independent variables. A researcher should be looking into that if he or she is going to build a model suggesting a relationship. Definitely it will be ideal to include the impact of this mediation variable in that relationship, because then only the researcher would be able to come to a real conclusion saying that yes, this model will work in all these conditions. In order to make that model a sophisticated one, it should also consider the effect of this mediating variables when it is cutting the relationship between dependent and independent variable. So that's all about intervening variables. Now the next one is dichotomous. Dichotomous variables are a variable used to compare two things. It has two values. Okay, that's the easiest thing to understand. It has two values. Say, for example, I want to study what is the impact of after sales service on customer satisfaction. Again, I want to understand whether the customer satisfaction in this particular study is different for male and female. That's a dichotomous variable. Two values, two variables, two values for that. The variable is gender, two values, male and female. Okay, so in that particular, in the same example where I was discussing, I thought after sales service can have different impact based on different impact on customer satisfaction based on gender. So I have another variable where I will be looking into what is it different for male and female. So such type of values, such type of variables will be called as dichotomous variables. It will have two values, male and female. Okay, yes or no. Likewise, dichotomous variables. Two is the key point which you have to remember in case of dichotomous variable. Okay. Now, the next one is quantitative and qualitative variable. It's very easy for you to understand. Uh, um, Always we say that a variable should be quantitatively expressed, but quantitative variables has its own value. Whereas qualitative variables, we give some value to that. Say, for example, pass or fail. Maybe satisfied or not satisfied. I'm going to give a value as 1 or 2. Okay, a person with qualification, when I'm taking the sample, there would be people with different qualification levels. Maybe people with secondary education, maybe people with undergraduation, post-graduation, higher studies or professional studies. So I'm going to give different values for each of it for me to identify that. But actually, does it carry some value? No. When I give 1 to secondary education, or when I give 2 to graduation, when I give 3 to post graduation, it's actually a representation. It's value being attributed to those things. It's a representation. It does not have any meaning. It does not say that if you possess secondary education, you are quantified as 1. If you have graduation, you will get 2 points. It's not like that. I'm attributing some values to those variables for me to identify. That is what we call as qualitative expressions, or also called as attributes. Okay, it does not have its own value. But when I'm saying about my weight, yes, there is a value for that. Temperature, there is a value for that. Right? Height, there is a value for that. But when I'm talking about a scenario pass or fail, it does not have any value. I'm attributing some value to that. That will be qualitative. But in social science research, as we said in the beginning, the variable should be assigned with some value. Either the actual value or attributed value for us to go with further analysis. So that's what we call as quantitative and qualitative variable. Now the next one is moderating variable. We talked about mediating variable, where it is actually it is intervening the relationship between dependent and independent variable. This is moderating variables are, it can strengthen or diminish, or maybe it can alter the association between independent and dependent variable. It is otherwise called a second level independent variable. Okay, second level independent variable. Maybe the example which it's easy for you to understand with an example. So the example which I have put is impact of after sales service on customer satisfaction. The after sales service and the relationship between customer satisfaction can be strengthened if there are less number of similar products and less number of competition in the market. There can be. But if the customer is having n number of choice, n number of variety of similar products in the market, he or she would be making comparison. So always there is a threat to another factor called competition in the market. If the competition is less, the relationship can be strengthened. If the competition is high, the relation may be little less because there is some kind of comparison that is happening in the market. So such variables can be called as moderating variables. It is affecting the relationship between it is affecting the relationship between the two. This is also an independent availability of other products. Nobody can manipulate it. Nobody can manipulate it. You only can study the impact of that on your dependent variable. You cannot say that no product should come. This is monopolistic market. No, monopoly. No, you cannot say. You cannot say that. You have to accept how is it in the market. Right. So if that is the case, if there are many products, maybe if the after sales service of those companies are something different from yours, the relationship between your after sales service and the customer satisfaction, your customers, the relationship between you and your customers can vary. Can no if it is a general notion that if there are less competitions, less comparison can happen, so customers can be satisfied with good after sales service. But there are certain cases when you're offering the best after sales service possible, but still the satisfaction level may be little less because of the tough competition in the market, because of comparison that is being made in the market scenario. So that is why it is called a second level independent variable, right? So such variables are called as moderating variables, right? And the last one which we will be discussing in our today's class is confounding variables. Confounding variables will have effect on both independent and dependent variable, will be affecting the result of it. Will here in this case we were talking about, it will have some kind of it is an independent second level independent variable that is having an effect on dependent variable in case of moderating variables. But here what we are talking about is these confounding variables will be having an effect on independent variable as well as dependent variable. The best example which you can understand is activity level and weight gain. I'm going to know you are doing exercise, you might be doing yoga, same as I am also doing maybe similar kind of exercise, yoga, all those things. But its effect is very much dependent on one factor called age. I'm older than you, so maybe my activity level will be, how much ever I try, might be little less than yours. Maybe my weight gain is also dependent on my age, metabolism rate. As I grow older, maybe the possibility that I will have to do more than what you are doing to make my or to control my weight gain. Right. So age is one factor which can affect my activity level as well as my weight gain. So it's actually a variable. Confounding variables are variables that can have effect on both independent variable and dependent variable. Right. So such variables are, it's very easy for you if you can remember that with example. Remember the example when you study, it will be easy, it will automatically run to you what it is. It will have an impact on your independent and the dependent variable. This example is very easy for you to understand the level, the kind of exercise, difficult exercise you take. Right, the activity level as well as your weight gain. Maybe I'm doing same type of exercise as you do, but my weight gain would be little higher because of the difference in the metabolism rate since I'm older than you. So that's why activity level and weight gain. Age is one factor, one confounding variable. It can have impact on both these. Right? So these are the different major, I'm not saying these are the only types of variables, these are the major types of variables which we need to understand very clearly when we are going with identification of variables. I'll just quickly summarize it. First we started with variable. A variable is something, it should be, as we said, we should have some value for that, either a real value or an assigned value. That's why at times we call attributed value. Some value should be there, and this value can differ depending on the condition, depending on the circumstances, depending on the time. But definitely it should be there for us to come to some meaningful conclusions. We need to perform different statistical analysis. It can be parametric or non-parametric analysis, but we need to do some kind of analysis to come to conclusions. Now, the types of variables, broadly in our class today, we discussed about 10 types of variables. The first one, dependent variable. As we said, the variable is its value is dependent on some other variable. It's dependent, right? Its performance is dependent on many other factors. Such variables are called as dependent variables. Independent variables are supposed to have some kind of impact on another variable. They are having some kind of influence on dependent variable, right? That is why we call that as independent variable. The impact of that is felt in another variable, and that another variable is called as dependent variable. Now, discrete variable is a variable that can take only real value. You have to have an integer, full whole sum number for it. The best example which you can remember is number of students, okay, in a class. Or now, as you say, no, number, I cannot express that as 1.5 or 1.75 or maybe 1.2. I have to say either 1 or 2. Right? So such variables are called as discrete variables. Continuous variable is it can take any value, continuous value. Temperature is the best kind of example, which can, maybe when I'm taking 22.5, it can go up to 22.56, 57, 58. Such variables are called as continuous variables. Extraneous variables, they are variables that are supposed to have some kind of impact on the dependent variable. Independent variables, they are having some kind of impact on the dependent variables. But for a particular study, for this study or maybe the study in our hand, these variables are beyond our scope. We are not including that in our study. In fact, we are trying to nullify the impact of such variables on the results of our study. We know that these variables are present, but we are not going with studying that for the purpose of our particular study in hand. Maybe because of the limitation with time, resources, or maybe we want to understand one particular relationship in depth. So that's why we are not going into including these type of variables. Now the next one is intervening variables. I said, yeah. Okay, I said intervening variables are otherwise called as mediating variables. They are intervening the relationship between the independent and dependent variables. Okay, then dichotomous variables. The value of this, I think some of your yes, one of your have unmuted it by mistake. No, Jubil or Aparna, both of yours are unmuted. Maybe just check whose is that. Okay, I'm just continuing with. So dichotomous variable, it is a variable with two values. Okay, two values means the best example is if I take gender, it can have two values, male and female. If I have a question as are you satisfied with a particular product, it can take two values like yes and no. That is actually dichotomous variable. And then quantitative and qualitative variable, the best thing which you have to remember about quantitative is it has its own value, height, weight, it has its own value. Whereas qualitative, we are assigning, we are attributing values to that for us to study. I said the example of your educational qualification, I'm giving 1 to a person with secondary education, 2 to a person with graduation, 3 to a person with post-graduation, 4 to a person beyond that. That's just a value being assigned. It does not carry any meaning. So that's what we call as qualitative variable. Then moderating variable is otherwise called as second level independent variable. These factors also have significant impact on the, as we call the dependent variable, but we are just looking at it from an indirect angle. Maybe we do not include, but these moderating variable are supposed to have some sort of relationship, some sort of relationship or impact on the dependent variable. Such type of variables are called as moderating variables. Then confounding variables. I said these variables will be having impact both on the independent as well as the dependent variable. They will have impact on both these, and sometimes this relationship can result in spurious relationship. It's like your studies might become useless if you are not able to control the impact of these two factors, because we know that the as I said, the example as activity level and the kind of weight gain. Age is one factor. If you are not able to categorize this, the relationship on the basis of age, the study will become useless. The relationship, what you've explained, is useless. You will not reach to a conclusion. You will have to say that a person below the age group of, say, 20 years, this is the kind of, this is the strength of this relationship. As the activity increases, the wage gain can be controlled to this percentage. A person between the age of 20 to 40, this is the kind of relationship. This is the percentage of increase which you can expect. If you're not trying to categorize that like that, that study is a useless one, because the relationship cannot be understood well if you are not looking into a categorization based on age, right? Sometimes gender also is a factor in that. No, weight gain can vary between the activity level that is taken by men and women can vary, right? So weight gain and the relationship might have to be classified on the basis of gender also. So such type of variables are called as confounding variables. Okay, so that's for today's class.